The ring had been sitting in his breast pocket for 3 weeks. A cushion-cut diamond in a platinum setting, something Ethan Caldwell had chosen himself, alone in a jeweler's quiet showroom on a Tuesday afternoon while the city moved indifferently outside the glass. He had turned the velvet box over in his fingers more times than he could count. In the back of the car between board meetings. At the edge of his daughter Lily's bed, long after she had fallen into the deep and untroubled sleep that only 7-year-olds manage. In the dark of his own room, where silence had become his most faithful companion for the past 2 years. He had planned to propose that Saturday evening. The table was set the way Celeste liked it: white candles, no overhead light, the wine already breathing on the credenza. Lily was safely upstairs with the weekend sitter, and Celeste had worn the red dress, the kind of dress that made a room stop moving when she entered it. Everything had been arranged down to the last detail. What he hadn't arranged for was the woman who came through the kitchen door at 7:30, carrying a mop bucket and a quiet dignity that no amount of marble flooring or crystal stemware could diminish. What he hadn't arranged for were the 3 words his fiancée would say next, words so small they barely made a sound, yet somehow large enough to crack the evening open and let the truth begin pouring in. "She's just a cleaner." Ethan went very still. Not the stillness of a man who hadn't heard. The stillness of a man who heard perfectly and was deciding what to do about it. He looked at Celeste's profile, that composed, practiced expression she wore like a second skin, and then he looked at Marisol, who stood in the doorway with her eyes lowered and her spine straight, as if she had spent her entire life learning how to absorb cruelty without letting it reshape her. The ring box pressed against his ribs. He reached into his pocket. He set it on the white tablecloth without a single word. Then he stood, crossed the room in 6 quiet steps, and held the kitchen door open for Marisol, not because she was leaving, but because she deserved the kind of welcome his dining room had failed to offer her. If you're enjoying this story so far, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe. Drop a comment telling me where in the world you're watching from. I love hearing from you. It had started 3 weeks before that dinner, on a Monday morning that smelled like rain and overripe fruit from the cart on the corner below Marisol Vega's apartment window. She was awake before 5, the way she always was, not from habit, but from the particular vigilance of a woman who had learned that difficult things tend to arrive in the quiet hours, and so she had long since made a practice of being ready for them. The apartment was small enough that she could hear Sophia breathing from across the hallway. Her daughter slept the way she did, everything with total commitment, curled on her side with one hand pressed flat against the mattress, as if steadying herself even in dreams. At 9 years old, Sophia had already learned to sleep lightly on the hard nights. Those nights when the coughing came back and the inhaler sat on the nightstand like a small, necessary prayer. But tonight had been a good night, and Marisol stood for a moment in the doorway, just listening, gathering that sound like something she could spend later. On the kitchen table, fanned out beneath the salt shaker so they wouldn't shift in the draft from the window, were the medical bills. Marisol didn't need to read them anymore. She knew every figure by memory the way some people memorize song lyrics, involuntarily, permanently. Sophia's cardiologist had used the word surgery in October, spoken it carefully the way doctors speak words they know will land like stones in still water. The procedure itself was possible. The cost of it was another kind of mathematics entirely, one that required Marisol to carry 4 cleaning contracts simultaneously, to skip meals she didn't mention skipping, and to add her name to a waiting list for a hospital assistance program that had not yet called her back. She poured coffee, folded the bills into the envelope she kept on top of the refrigerator between Sophia's crayon drawings, and went to get dressed. Today was the first day at a new house. The cleaning agency had sent the assignment late Friday with a note that said simply, "Long-term placement. Discretion required. The Caldwell residence." She had written the address on her wrist in pen the way she always did for new clients, and she read it again on the bus while the city was still gray and unhurried, the windows fogged with other people's breath. She knew the neighborhood. Everyone in the city knew it in the abstract way you know a place you have never been permitted to belong to by its architecture, by the quality of its trees, by the way the sidewalks were clean in a manner that felt curated rather than accidental. The Caldwell house sat behind a low stone wall on a street where every house maintained its privacy like a form of good manners. A brass plate beside the gate said nothing except a street number. Marisol pressed the intercom and waited. The housekeeper who let her in was a compact woman named Mrs. Okafor with reading glasses on a chain around her neck and the manner of someone who had run this household longer than most of its furniture. She walked Marisol through the ground floor at a pace that suggested she trusted competent people to keep up and did not intend to slow down for anyone who wasn't. The kitchen was professional grade and spotless. The main hallway was floored in limestone, so pale it almost glowed. There was a music room that smelled faintly of rosin, a library where the books appeared to have actually been read, and at the far end of the east wing, a child's playroom in which every toy was arranged with a precision that felt more like preservation than play. "Lily doesn't always come down in the mornings," Mrs. Okafor said when they passed the playroom door. "She'll let you know when she's ready." Marisol asked how old she was. 7. She was 5 when her mother died. Mrs. Okafor said it plainly, without apology, the way you say a true thing you have made peace with. "She's a quiet child. Not shy, she'll look you straight in the eye. But she talks when she decides she wants to, and not before." They were halfway back to the kitchen when Marisol heard heels on the limestone, a sharp, deliberate sound that arrived a full 3 seconds before its source. Celeste Harmon came around the corner in a cream-colored blazer and the kind of effortless composure that takes considerable daily maintenance to sustain. She was beautiful in the way of women who have learned to manage their beauty as a resource, and she looked at Marisol the way you look at a piece of furniture you didn't select and aren't sure you want to keep. "You're the new placement," she said. It was not a question. "Yes, Marisol Vega." Celeste's eyes moved over her once coat, shoes, the worn strap of her canvas bag, and then she turned to Mrs. Okafor with a smile that somehow managed to exclude the third person in the room entirely. "I've written out the weekly schedule. The bathrooms are to be done before 9, not after. Mr. Caldwell works from the study on Tuesdays and Thursdays and does not like to hear the vacuum." She paused. "Also, the third-floor hallway is not part of the cleaning rotation. It's a personal space, and it stays that way." Marisol nodded. She said nothing because she had learned, long before this moment, that silence in the presence of a certain kind of dismissal is not submission, it is strategy. That first day passed the way first days do, in the accumulation of small observations. The house was immaculate, but not warm. Someone had placed fresh flowers in the entrance hall, yellow tulips, precise in their vase, but there were no family photographs anywhere on the ground floor. No shoes left by the door. No cups rinsed and left on the draining board. The house had been organized to communicate something, and what it communicated was control. Ethan Caldwell came through the kitchen just before noon. Marisol was on her knees cleaning beneath the breakfast bar when she heard him, and she stayed where she was, not from self-effacement, but from the practical understanding that people move more naturally when they don't feel observed. He was younger than she had expected, late 30s, perhaps early 40s, with the particular tiredness of someone who sleeps adequately but rests not at all. He poured coffee without looking at the mug. He checked his phone. Then he stopped and looked at the floor where she was working and said, in a tone that was neither warm nor cold, but simply present, "You must be the new placement. I hope the agency explained the hours." She said yes, she understood the hours. He said something about the study being off limits between 10 and 4, and then he was gone, and the kitchen felt the way rooms feel when they were too briefly occupied. It was the child who changed the texture of the day. Lily came downstairs at 2 in the afternoon, wearing one blue sock and one yellow one, and holding a drawing pad pressed against her chest the way some children carry stuffed animals, not for comfort, exactly, but as an extension of themselves, something they are not quite ready to put down. She stopped at the bottom of the staircase and looked at Marisol, who was working in the hallway, with that direct, unhurried gaze Mrs. Okafor had described. Marisol looked back without filling the silence with sound. She simply waited, because she had always understood that children who hold their words this carefully deserve the space to choose the right moment. After a while, Lily crossed the hallway and held out her drawing pad so that Marisol could see the open page. It was a house rendered with the specific combination of ambition and imperfect proportion that makes a child's drawing feel more true than a photograph. For windows, a door, a tree beside it with yellow circles that might have been fruit or might have been light. And standing in the doorway of the drawn house, a figure with long dark hair and what appeared to be a pair of rubber gloves. "Is that for a character?" Marisol asked, keeping her voice level. careful not to make the moment bigger than Lily wanted it to be. Lily shook her head slowly. Is it someone you know? Lily looked at her steadily. Then she pointed at Marisol's hands. Marisol looked down at her cleaning gloves, yellow rubber, slightly too large for her hands, the same pair she'd had for the better part of a year. When she looked back up, Lily had already turned and was walking back upstairs, drawing pad tucked under her arm, one blue sock and one yellow sock disappearing around the corner of the landing. Marisol stood in the hallway holding the image of that drawing like something she hadn't been prepared to receive. She finished the ground floor by 4:30. The third-floor hallway, as instructed, she did not touch. But at the end of the east wing on the second floor, where the hallway turned toward the back staircase, there was a gallery wall she had noticed that morning and not yet properly seen, a collection of framed photographs arranged with some care against a pale gray wall. Most of them were what you would expect. A formal shot of the house taken from the garden, a professional photograph of Ethan at what appeared to be an industry event, Lily at various ages holding various objects with the preoccupied joy of a child who has not yet learned to perform for cameras. Then Marisol's eyes moved to the photograph at the center of the arrangement, the largest one, mounted in a simple dark frame. A woman in a hospital garden, not posed, but caught mid-turn, laughing at something just outside the frame, her hair loose, her face entirely open. The kind of photograph that captures a person in the precise moment they have forgotten to be anything other than themselves. Marisol stopped breathing. She knew that face. She had held that hand. She had sat beside that bed through nights so long they seemed to exist outside of ordinary time, and she had listened to the voice that belonged to that face speak of her husband and her daughter with the particular tenderness of someone already beginning to let go of the people they love, gently, so they don't feel the weight of the leaving. Claire Caldwell. Patient, room 14. The woman Marisol had cared for in her last months, in a private care facility 2 years ago, before everything fell apart. Before the letter. Before the accusation that had taken her nursing license and left her standing in the wreckage of a career she had spent 12 years building, with no proof and no recourse, and only one undelivered promise pressing against her ribs like a second heartbeat. She pressed one yellow-gloved hand to the wall beside the frame, steadying herself. The hallway was empty. The house was quiet. Somewhere upstairs, she could hear the distant scratch of a pencil Lily, drawing in whatever private universe she maintained up there, and from the east wing, the muffled sound of a phone call in the study, Ethan's voice, professional and clipped. Marisol reached into the canvas bag at her shoulder and found it by touch. The way you find a thing you have carried so long its dimensions are written into your palm. A sealed envelope, white once, now gone to cream at the edges. The flap had been reinforced with packing tape years ago, when she realized she might be carrying it for longer than she'd planned. Across the front, in the careful handwriting of a woman who had known her hands were failing and had written deliberately because of it, for Ethan, when he is ready. She had not known how to find him. He was not a man who published home addresses, and she had not known his wife's last name until she walked into this house and stood in front of this photograph and understood that the city had been carrying them toward each other in its slow, indifferent way all along. If you're hooked on this story, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss an upload. Your support means everything and helps me bring you more emotional stories like this one. She did not sleep well that night. In her small apartment, with Sophia breathing steadily in the next room and the city doing whatever cities do in the hours before dawn, Marisol lay on her back and held the envelope against her chest and thought about what it meant to be in the right place at precisely the moment you had given up believing the right place existed. She had asked herself, in the years since she lost her nursing license, whether there was a version of this story where she had moved faster, gotten the envelope to Ethan before the complaint was filed, stood her ground differently, found another way in. But grief has a way of collapsing alternative pathways until they are indistinguishable from the regret they grew out of, and eventually she had stopped walking them. She had folded her nursing scrubs and put them in a box under the bed. She had taken the cleaning work because it was available, because it paid, because Sophia's heart would not wait for her to mourn a career that was gone. And she had carried the envelope the way you carry something unfinished, always aware of its weight, never quite able to set it down. She went back to the Caldwell house on Tuesday, and Wednesday, and the Thursday after that. Each day layered something new onto what she already knew. The household had a rhythm that on the surface appeared orderly, but in its smaller details told a more complicated story. There were 2 photographs of Claire on the second floor and none on the first, as if someone had been in the process of removing her, and then paused, or changed their mind, or simply run out of certainty. The playroom on the ground floor was kept exactly as Lily had arranged it herself, toys sorted into categories that made sense only to a 7-year-old's private logic. And Mrs. Okafor had warned Marisol on the first day never to reorganize anything in that room without asking Lily first. In the kitchen, the mug that sat in the second position from the left on the cabinet shelf was a pale blue ceramic with a small chip on the handle that had been repaired with the kind of care you do not spend on an object unless it was a gift from someone no longer there to ask about it. Ethan Caldwell moved through this house like a man navigating a space he had once loved and now moved through carefully, the way you move through a room where something fragile is stored. Celeste moved through it like it already belonged to her. It was on the 4th day that the recognition happened. Marisol was in the east hallway, running a cloth along the baseboard's careful, methodical work that she did the same way she had done everything in the years before, with her full attention, because anything worth doing was worth the respect of full attention when she heard footsteps stop behind her. Not Mrs. Okafor's efficient rhythm, not Ethan's distracted tread, the slow, deliberate pause of someone who had been stopped by something they were not prepared to see. Marisol rose and turned. Celeste was standing 6 feet away, perfectly composed except for the thing happening behind her eyes, a rapid, involuntary calculation, the kind of look that moves across a face in the half-second before the mask resets. It was the look of a woman who had just recognized something she thought she had successfully erased. Neither of them spoke for a moment. The hallway held the silence between them like water in a bowl, kept perfectly still. Then Celeste smiled. "You're doing the baseboards," she said. "Good. The last placement never touched them." "I like to be thorough," Marisol said. "Of course you do." Celeste tilted her head, in the manner of someone choosing their words with the care of a person who has been choosing words carefully for a long time. "I want us to understand each other," she said, and her voice was pleasant, unhurried, the way a body of deep water is pleasant when you cannot see the floor of it. "This is a private household. Mr. Caldwell values that privacy enormously. His family's business is exactly that, his family's. I assume the agency made that clear." "They said discretion was required," Marisol said. "I understand what that means." "Good." Celeste held her gaze for 1 beat longer than was necessary. "I'm sure you do." She walked away, and the sound of her heels on the limestone was clean and unhurried. And if you hadn't seen what moved across her face a moment before, you would have thought the exchange entirely unremarkable. Marisol waited until she heard the door at the end of the hallway open and close. Then she released the breath she had been holding since the moment those footsteps stopped behind her. Celeste remembered her. Marisol was certain of it now, and Celeste knew or feared that the memory traveled in both directions. It was Lily who made the house bearable in the days that followed. The child had a language that was mostly not words, a language of placement and proximity, and the specific orientation of her body toward a person, which communicated more than most adults manage with complete sentences. She began appearing in whatever room Marisol was working in, not to speak, but simply to be in the same space. She would settle on the floor with her drawing pad and work in parallel silence, and after a while this stopped feeling like a coincidence and started feeling like an arrangement they had reached without discussing it. One afternoon, Lily looked up from her drawing and said, without preamble, "You smell like the good soap." Marisol asked what the good soap smelled like. Lily considered this with great seriousness. "Like when someone is going to take care of something," she said. Then she returned to her drawing as if this were a perfectly ordinary contribution to a perfectly ordinary day. Marisol did not say anything. She kept working, but she felt the sentence settle into her chest and stay there. 3 days later, Lily came to find her in the library and took her hand, a small hand, very warm, the grip of someone who has decided to trust you and is done waiting to announce it, and led her upstairs to her bedroom without explanation. The room was what you might expect from a child who processes the world through drawing. The walls were covered, floor to ceiling on 2 sides, with papers pinned in overlapping layers. Houses and trees, figures in various states of motion, animals with improbable colors, vehicles of unclear purpose. And at the center of the arrangement, given the only clear wall space that nothing else competed with, framed not in glass, but in a border Lily had drawn directly onto the paper in careful brown crayon strokes, was a portrait. A woman seated in a chair beside a window. Long hair, hands folded in her lap. The face had been drawn and redrawn, the lines gone soft with revision, until it had arrived at something that felt more like memory than likeness, the way we draw people we are trying to hold on to rather than people we are trying to represent. Lily pointed at the portrait without looking at it. "That's Mommy," she said. Marisol looked at the face. She thought of the woman in the gallery photographed downstairs mid-turn, laughing, entirely herself. She thought of room 14. She thought of the envelope in her bag, 2 floors below them, and of the weight it had been carrying for 2 years on behalf of both of them. "She's beautiful," Marisol said. Her voice came out steady, which surprised her. Lily nodded. "She used to draw with me," she said. "She wasn't very good, but she tried really hard." She considered this for a moment. "That's better than being good, isn't it?" Marisol said yes. She was quite certain that was true. Ethan Caldwell noticed the change in his daughter the way you notice a shift in weather, not in a single moment, but across several mornings, each one slightly different from the one before, until the accumulation becomes impossible to dismiss. Lily was talking more, not in the relentless way of children who talk to fill space, but in the particular way of children who have found a person worth directing their words toward. She was leaving her drawing pad on the kitchen table in the evenings, open to pages she wanted seen. She had started eating breakfast without being asked twice. He mentioned it to Mrs. Okafor on a Thursday, in the kitchen, while Marisol was somewhere upstairs working. Mrs. Okafor looked at him over the top of her reading glasses with the expression of a woman who has known the answer to a question before it was asked. "She follows the new placement around," she said. "Has done since the first week." Ethan was quiet for a moment. "Is that, should I wouldn't interfere," Mrs. Okafor said pleasantly, in the tone she used when she had already made a decision and was simply allowing him the courtesy of arriving at the same one. She refilled his coffee and said nothing more. That evening, he stood in the doorway of the library without announcing himself. Lily was on the floor with her drawing pad, and Marisol was restacking books on the lower shelves, the kind of work that looks like cleaning but is really a form of attention to a room's particular needs. They were not talking, but the silence between them had the texture of something shared rather than something empty, and Lily was drawing with the focused ease of a child who knows she is safe enough to concentrate. Ethan watched for a long moment. He felt something move in his chest that he didn't immediately have a name for. Then he went quietly back to his study and sat for a long time without turning on his computer. Celeste moved carefully in the days that followed, but Marisol recognized the strategy the way you recognize a game you have played before under a different name. Small accusations delivered with great reasonableness, each one deniable, each one designed to build a case for why the new placement was not working out. The sterling silver in the dining room was cloudy. Hadn't Marisol polished it on Monday? The guest towels in the east bathroom had been refolded incorrectly. A small jade figurine in the sitting room had been moved slightly off-center on its shelf, which Celeste mentioned to Mrs. Okafor with the concerned patience of a woman who only wants things done to a proper standard. Mrs. Okafor relayed these observations to Marisol with the flat delivery of someone who has worked in enough houses to know the difference between a legitimate complaint and a campaign. She said nothing editorially. She simply passed the information along and returned to what she was doing. Marisol corrected every item without comment. She polished the silver until she could see her own reflection in it. She refolded the towels. She moved the jade figurine back to precisely the position it had been in before anyone touched it, and she said nothing to anyone about any of it. Then came the afternoon. She returned to the entrance hallway to find Celeste crouched over her canvas bag, not searching through it. Exactly, Celeste was not a woman who did anything as undignified as rummage. She was holding the bag open with 2 fingers, looking inside with the composed expression of someone trying to appear as if they are doing something other than what they are doing. The envelope was visible. Marisol could see from across the room the cream-colored corner of it, pressed against the worn lining of the bag. And she could see the precise moment Celeste saw it too, the almost imperceptible stillness in her body, the flicker behind her eyes. Celeste looked up and saw Marisol watching her. A beat passed between them across the width of the hallway. I thought I heard something fall, Celeste said pleasantly. Marisol crossed the room, picked up the bag, and thanked her for her concern. That night, in her apartment, with the envelope on the kitchen table and Sophia's drawings shifting faintly in the air from the cracked window, Marisol understood with clarity that she was running out of time. Celeste knew. Whatever she planned to do next, she would do it quickly, because she was not a woman who allowed a threat to sit unaddressed. Marisol had, at most, a few days before she would be removed from this house on whatever grounds could be manufactured, and once she was gone, the envelope would have nowhere left to go, and Claire's words would belong to no one. The dinner party was on the following Saturday. Celeste had arranged it with the smooth efficiency of a woman who excels at turning private agendas into social occasions. 6 of Ethan's business colleagues and their wives, a table set for 10, the kind of catered refinement that communicates wealth without appearing to try. Mrs. Okafor had been given the evening off offered it 2 days in advance, which Marisol noted with the particular attention she now paid to everything Celeste arranged. The catering staff managed the kitchen. Marisol had been asked to handle the service hallway and the back of house. She had stayed later than she needed to. There was work to do, and beyond the work, there was the decision she had been circling for 2 weeks. She needed to be in this house. She needed to wait for the right moment, one where Ethan was alone, where Celeste was not positioned between them, where she could place the envelope in his hands and give him the only explanation she had. She had rehearsed it in her apartment at the kitchen table until the words felt less like a prepared speech and more like the truth, which is what they were. The dinner conversation filtered through the kitchen door in fragments, voices raised against each other in the cheerful competition of people accustomed to being heard. Celeste's laugh, precise and deployed at intervals that suggested calculation, exactly often enough to seem spontaneous, never often enough to seem easy. Ethan's voice, less frequent, more measured, carrying the slightly formal quality of a man performing a version of himself he has worn so often it fits without fitting, like a coat in someone else's cut. It was not a deliberate entrance. Marisol had come through the kitchen door to collect the dessert service tray that had been left on the counter, because it was her work, because it needed doing, because she had not imagined for one moment that this particular door would open directly into Celeste's sight line at the precise moment that Celeste had an audience and a point she had been positioning toward all evening. The room did not go entirely quiet. But the conversation shifted the way conversations shift when something has entered the space that needs to be acknowledged or dismissed, and Celeste, with the practiced efficiency of someone who has always known which tool to reach for, chose dismissal. "Oh, don't mind her," she said. Her voice was light, hostess warm, inclusive of everyone at the table and no one in the doorway. "She's just a cleaner." 3 words, delivered with the particular cruelty of understatement, not a shout, not a scene, but a neat and precise reduction of a human being to her function, offered to 10 well-dressed people who would go home that night and remember it, if they remembered it at all, as only a minor grace note in an otherwise pleasant evening. Marisol stood in the doorway. She did not look at Celeste. She did not look at the table. She fixed her gaze on a point in the middle distance and waited, the way she had waited all her life, for the room to exhaust itself and move on, for the small machinery of cruelty to run its course and let her collect the tray and go. And then she became aware of a silence that was different from the one that had just filled the room, a silence with mass and intention, and she looked up, and Ethan Caldwell was not looking at the table, or at Celeste, or at any of his 10 guests. He was looking at her, with the steady, wide-awake attention of a man who has just heard something that has reordered the room for him, who is no longer in the same conversation he was in 30 seconds ago. His expression was not dramatic. It was simply present in a way his face had not been all evening. He reached into his breast pocket. He set the velvet ring box on the white tablecloth, not with force, not with ceremony, but with the quiet finality of a man setting down something he has been carrying and has decided he is finished carrying. Then he stood, folded his napkin once, placed it beside his plate, and walked the length of the table without looking back. He crossed the room. He held the kitchen door open. Not for Celeste. For Marisol. In the kitchen, the catering staff moved around them with the practiced discretion of professionals who have learned to exist alongside private moments without entering them. Ethan stood with his back to the dining room door and looked at Marisol, and for a moment neither of them said anything. He looked like a man who has just put down something heavy, not relieved exactly, but altered, the way a body adjusts after long tension releases. "I'm sorry," he said, "for what happened in there. For all of it." Marisol looked at him. She looked at the face she had seen only in glimpses over 3 weeks, passing through rooms, distracted in doorways, standing at the edge of his daughter's life without quite stepping into it. She looked at this man who had been living in his grief the way a person lives in a house they no longer feel entitled to occupy carefully, without touching the walls. She reached into her canvas bag. Her fingers found the envelope the way they always did, by touch, by the familiar weight, by the worn corners that had shaped themselves to her hands over 2 years of carrying. She held it for a moment without pulling it out, because she knew what delivering it would cost, and she needed one more breath before she spent that. Through the closed door, she could hear Celeste's voice rising smoothly to manage whatever wreckage the empty chair and the ring on the table had left in the dining room. Efficient, composed, practiced. Marisol thought of Lily, upstairs in her room, drawing a face she was trying to hold on to. She thought of Claire's voice saying, "When he is ready," as if she had always understood the timing would not belong to either of them. She thought of Sophia, asleep in their apartment across the city, chest rising and falling, small heart working as hard as it could. She pulled the envelope from the bag. She held it out to Ethan Caldwell with both hands, the way you offer something that has been waiting a long time to arrive. "This was given to me," she said, "by your wife." Ethan looked at the envelope for a long time before he touched it. His eyes moved across the front, the cream paper gone soft at the corners. The handwriting, he recognized the way you recognize something you have been missing without knowing you were missing it. And something crossed his face that was not quite grief and not quite relief, but lived in the precise space between them. He took the envelope. He did not open it immediately. He held it in both hands the way Marisol had held it out to him, and he looked at her and said, very quietly, "How long have you had this?" She told him. 2 years. She told him about room 14, about the nights she had sat with Claire when the hours were long and the pain was managed but not gone, about the conversations a woman has at the end of her life when she is no longer performing anything for anyone and only wants to say what is true. She told him about the sealed envelope and the instruction when he is ready, and about the false complaint that had taken her license before she could find a way to reach him. She did not raise her voice. She did not ask him to believe her. She simply told him, because the truth does not require decoration to hold its shape. He listened without interrupting. When she finished, the kitchen was very quiet. Somewhere above them, a floorboard shifted Lily, turning over in sleep or perhaps simply present in the way children are present, absorbing the frequencies of a house without being told to. Ethan opened the envelope. He read it standing at the kitchen counter, and Marisol did not watch his face because some moments are not meant to be witnessed. She turned to the window and looked at the garden, dark now, the limestone path pale in the low light, and she listened to the silence behind her, which changed as he read the way the quality of silence changes when it is carrying something. Claire had written carefully. She had described her suspicion that the experimental trial she had been steered away from by a specialist Celeste had insisted upon, a second opinion that arrived exactly when Celeste offered it, might have given her more time. She did not accuse with certainty. She asked him only to look, to find the records, to ask the questions she had been too tired and too frightened and too willing to trust the people around her to ask for herself. And at the end, she had written something about Lily, about who Lily would need in the years ahead, about the kind of presence that cannot be purchased or arranged, only recognized. She had written it in the careful hand of a woman who knew her hands were failing and had chosen every word because she understood she would not get to choose again. Ethan set the letter down on the counter. He pressed both hands flat against the surface, and Marisol heard him exhale a long, slow breath, the kind that carries something out of the body that has been held there too long. Then the dining room door opened, and Celeste came through it. She had clearly already composed herself, the smile arranged, the posture aligned, the voice preloaded with reasonable concern. She looked at the envelope on the counter and the letter beside it, and then at Ethan's hands, still pressed flat against the marble, and whatever she had prepared to say reorganized itself behind her eyes into something else entirely. "Ethan," she began. "Don't," he said. Not loud, not broken, simply final. The way a door is final when it closes on a room you are not going back into. She looked at Marisol, and in that look was everything she had spent 2 years managing: the calculation, the fear, the specific cruelty of a person who has been protecting a lie so long they have half forgotten it is one. "You have no idea what this woman is," she said, turning back to Ethan. "She was fired for theft. It's on record. Whatever she told you, whatever that letter claims, it claims nothing," Ethan said. "It asks questions, so I'm going to go find the answers." Celeste's composure held for one more moment. Then it didn't. Not dramatically, no slamming doors, no shouting. It simply slipped, the way a mask slips when the face beneath it has been held still too long. And what was underneath was not the monster of a simple story, but something more recognizable, and therefore more damning: a frightened person who had made choices so far past the point of justification that the only remaining strategy had been to keep moving forward and never look back. She left the kitchen. Marisol heard her heels on the limestone. She heard the front door. Then the house was still. It was in that stillness that Lily appeared. She came down the stairs in her bare feet, and her mismatched socks, one blue, one yellow, the same pair as the very first day, and she walked into the kitchen and looked at her father and then at Marisol, and she said nothing because she did not need to. She simply crossed the kitchen and pressed herself against Marisol's side, and Marisol put her hand on the back of her head, and the three of them stood in the kitchen with the letter on the counter and the garden dark outside the window, and the enormous quiet weight of a truth that had finally arrived where it was supposed to go. Ethan looked at his daughter's face. Then he looked at Marisol, at her worn canvas bag, at her yellow rubber gloves folded on the counter's edge, at the 2 years of work and waiting and Sophia's medical bills, and the particular kind of strength that does not announce itself, but simply keeps going. He looked at all of it, and what moved across his face was not pity. It was the recognition of something that had been present in this house for weeks, doing its quiet work, while he had been too busy living inside his own absence to see it. "I'd like you to stay," he said. "Not to clean, just to stay, if you're willing. For Lily. And because I think there's a great deal I owe you that I don't know how to begin to repay." Marisol looked at him for a long moment. Then she looked at Lily, who was watching her with those steady, unhurried eyes. "We can begin tomorrow," she said. It did not end with a single grand gesture. The truth rarely does. It ended with a doctor Ethan contacted on a Monday morning, medical records requested, questions finally asked that should have been asked years earlier. It ended with a cleared nursing record and a phone call from a licensing board that Marisol had stopped waiting for. It ended with Sophia's surgery, paid for quietly, without announcement, the way people pay debts they consider a matter of basic decency rather than generosity. It ended with Lily's drawing pad left open on the kitchen table one morning, and on the open page 2 figures in a house with a tree beside it, yellow circles that might be fruit or might be light, and in the doorway, side by side, a tall woman with long dark hair and a small girl in mismatched socks. Some truths move slowly. They travel through sealed envelopes and long nights and the hands of people who are not famous for their patience but practice it anyway, because what they are carrying is worth the time it takes to arrive. And when they finally land, not with thunder, but with the soft weight of a letter placed on a counter, a door opened, a child's hand taken, they rearrange everything. Quietly, permanently, the way only the true things do. Thank you so much for watching until the end. If you love this story, check out the other videos on your screen now. I think you'll really enjoy them. And don't forget to subscribe if you haven't already. See you in the next story.